lightning split the sky over Asgard, and every raven on Odin's shoulders fell silent. A streak of white fire tore sideways across the rainbow bridge. The earth itself trembled when his chariot struck the courtyard stone. This was Thor, the Norse God of Thunder, defender of the common world. And in his hand he carried a hammer that could level mountains in a single blow. He is the most human of all the Norse gods, fierce, loyal, quick-tempered as a summer storm at sea. By the end of this telling, you'll understand why farmers, sailors, and kings whispered his name for 3,000 winters. You will meet the mother who gave him the living earth itself. You will follow him into the cruelest test the giants ever devised. And you will stand beside him at the edge of the world, where even gods must fall. This is his story, told the old way, around the warm northern fire. Long before thundered across the northern sky, the great world tree Yggdrasil held 9 realms together in its branches. In its highest limb sat Asgard, the shining kingdom of the Aesir, the principal Norse gods. Its master was Odin the Allfather, a one-eyed god of wisdom, war, and poetry. But Odin had grown restless, and his eye wandered where it should not have wandered. He courted a giantess of the wild earth named Jörð, the soil itself beneath every traveler's feet. From that strange union came a red-bearded son whose laugh rattled the rafters of Asgard's halls. They named the boy Thor, and even as a child he swung his toy hammer harder than grown warriors swung axes. The Aesir accepted him with quiet caution, the rough cub of a foreign mother from Jotunheim, realm of the giants. Yet every god who sparred with him walked away bruised, and every giant who mocked him walked away smaller for it. He grew up fast, as the bards used to sing, for storms do not wait politely for spring to arrive. When Thor came of age at last, Odin gave him gifts forged by the dwarves of Svartalfheim's dark mines below. From a dying star they had hammered a weapon called Mjölnir, the grinder, that always returned to Thor's hand. Its leather-wrapped handle was too short to grip, the single flaw those master smiths ever allowed themselves in pride. He was also given Mjölnir, a belt of power that doubled his already supernatural strength on the battlefield. And on his fingers he wore iron gloves called Jörmungandr, which he needed merely to lift his own hammer's weight. Thor took to wife the goddess Sif, whose golden hair was said to be the rippling wheat of autumn harvest. With Sif he had a daughter named Thrud, whose fitting name simply meant strength in the old northern tongue. In time, Sif brought him a stepson, the Halfi, the swiftest mortal boy who ever ran across open green earth. Their home was Bilskirnir, meaning lightning crack, the very largest house in all the shining kingdom of Asgard. There Thor sat by the fire with Sif, ate bread, told simple stories, and slept more peacefully than any war god. But that peace was not meant to last, for a trickster prowled the golden halls of Asgard one fateful night. His name was Loki, Odin's sworn blood brother, born of giants yet raised among the gods since earliest infancy. Loki was clever in ways Thor was not, and bored in ways Thor could never quite manage to understand him. And this is where the legend turns darker, for one night in a cruel and careless whim, Loki cut off every strand of Sif's golden hair while she slept. Thor woke, saw his wife's shorn head, and the thunder that rolled from his throat cracked 3 stone pillars clean through. He caught Loki by the soft neck and swore by Mjolnir itself that the hair would be restored, or bones would be broken. Loki begged for time to repair his mischief, and that time was grudgingly granted to him by Father Odin. He fled down to the dwarves of Svartalfheim and bargained for new hair from the famous sons of the smith Ivaldi. To please the god, the dwarves also forged a spear for Odin, called Gungnir, which never missed its chosen mark. And for Freyr, the lord of fair weather and good harvests, they built a golden ship that folded neatly into a small pouch. Never satisfied, Loki then bet his own head that 2 other dwarves could match these 3 fine treasures in craftsmanship. From a whisper and a spark they forged Draupnir, a gold ring that dripped 8 new rings every 9th night for Odin. They made Dolenbursti, a golden bristled boar for Freyr, whose shining mane lit the dark wherever he proudly ran. And last, they forged Mjolnir itself, with its famously short handle, their one small flaw in an otherwise perfect work. Even the rival masters had to admit that the second set of treasures was finer, except for that one short handle. Loki fled as a darting salmon down the river, but Thor caught him by the tail in the shallows at journey's end. So the hammer was forged at last, Sif's golden hair returned, and a quiet lesson was carved into the oldest stone of Asgard. The lesson was simple and stern. Even the wisest halls still need a Thor in them to keep the clever ones honest. Thor was armed at last, and his chariot stood ready every dawn in the yard of Bilskirnir's high stone walls. It was drawn by two goats named Tangrisnir and Tangrestinarskjut, meaning the teeth-bearer and the teeth-grinder. These were magical goats that Thor could slaughter and eat fully for supper, then resurrect whole by morning with Mjolnir. His chariot had wheels of pure thunder, and sparks flew wherever the goats' hooves struck the cold open air above the road. But the gods were not done with him yet, and his strangest journey was now about to begin in plain farmer's clothing. One day, Thor set out with Loki, both dressed as mortal travelers in plain cloak and rough mittens of goatskin. They crossed the cold fields of Jotunheim, sleeping rough and begging bread from frightened farmsteads along the lonely road. They came at last to a strange high castle named Utgard, the cold feasting hall of a clever ancient giant king. That king called himself Utgarda Loki, master of weighty illusions, and welcomed the strangers with terrible slow courtesy. He led them inside to a vast feasting hall, where the firelight never quite reached the king's own massive shoulders. The giant smiled, and 3 contests began to test the strangers who claimed loudly to be no one special among mortals. Loki was set to eat from a long wooden trough, but Logi, the wildfire itself, ate bones and trough as well. The Jolfi raced against Hugi, who his swiftness given a name and was lapped across 3 long courses around the smoky hall. But the gods were not done with Thor yet, and the real test for the mighty thunder god was now coming before all. For the first trial, Thor was asked simply to drink from a drinking horn placed before him on the rough table. Thor sucked and drank and gasped hard for breath, but the level barely dipped from where it had been set before. For the second, Thor was asked to lift a gray house cat from the cold stone floor of the giant's wide hall. Thor braced, then strained, then roared in effort, but the cat arched only one paw off the cold flagstones. For the third, Thor was invited to wrestle an old woman, thin and bent as a winter willow by the fireside. He twisted and heaved with all his mighty will, but the old crone simply did not move one single careful inch. By supper's end, Thor was thoroughly humbled, and Gartha Loki bowed him out, smiling wider than he had all night. But the kindest twist of these clever giants was the quiet truth that they told to him at the breaking of first dawn. The horn had been tethered by cold magic to the sea itself, made one with the great tide of the world. The cat was no cat at all, but Jörmungandr, the world serpent, coiled patiently around the entire round earth. His arched back was the very curve of the world itself, lifting one paw from the salty sea far below. And the old woman was Ellie, old age itself, whose grip bends every god and mortal given long enough time. No living thing can wrestle time to the floor and win, not even the loudest god of all thunder and bright lightning storm. The gods were not done with him yet, for Thor had made the world serpent itself strain under his mighty grip that morning. The bards would remember this feat for 1,000 winters, the closest any god ever came to moving the entire earth in his hand. Not long after, the giant king Hymir invited Thor to row far out fishing beyond any charted edge of the sea. Thor brought as bait the great ox head, the toughest meat on the rough homestead farm of his hosts that morning. They rowed west, past every mapped cold coast, until at last, Thor's fishing line went taut as a war bowstring pulled. Up from the deep came Jörmungandr himself, eyes like cold suns and breath like a bitter winter storm made flesh. Thor wound up his hammer for the killing blow, but Hymir in sudden panic drew his belt knife and cut the line. The serpent sank back to its patient circling of the world, and Mjolnir fell on empty freezing water with a sigh. The gods were not done with him yet, for a stranger journey still waited ahead of him, full of trickery and stolen thunder. One morning, Thor woke cold and alone to find Mjölnir gone, his belt loose, his iron gloves cold on his fingers. A giant king named Thrym had stolen it from Asgard itself and buried it deep in the iron soil of Jotunheim. He would return the hammer only for the shining hand of Freyja, the most beautiful goddess in any of the 9 realms. Heimdall, the watchful guardian of the Rainbow Bridge, suggested the only solution anyone around the council could bear to speak. Thor would dress as Freyja in bridal gown and veil and travel to Thrym's cold iron hall pretending to be a bride. Loki, unloosed once more from his current punishment, would dress as her sweet sister, whispering soft nothings to the giant. Thor raised Mjolnir-shaped objections in honest rage, but Heimdall outvoted him in 10 quick heartbeats around the high table. They dressed Thor in fine linen, a headdress of white pearls and the bright necklace called Brisingamen around his throat. Loki smiled sweetly in his careful maiden shape, and the two rode out together in Thor's thundering chariot of storm. Thor ate a whole ox and 8 fat salmon on the long road, so nervous and so genuinely hungry was his spirit within. The gods were not done with him yet, and at Thrym's iron gate the bride was met by whispering, suspicious giant women. They whispered of her alarming size, her fiercely burning eyes, and a thick red beard peeking out from under the veil. Thrym himself kissed the bride's veil through the iron gates, and Loki lied that Freyja had eaten nothing in 8 long days. This pleased Thrym so very much that he ordered a doubled feast and the loud music to be played without a stop. Inside, Thor sat stiff as a broached oak through a long supper and the priest's slow, sacred marriage ceremony. At last, the groom Thrym approached to lift the veil for the sacred moment of seeing his new bride's face. Under the veil was one red eye burning like a furnace coal, for Thor truly could not help his own fierce self entirely. Loki sweetly whispered that Freyja had not slept in 8 nights, so great was her love for her new mountain husband. Thrym beamed with proper pride and called for Mjölnir to be laid in the bride's lap as the promised wedding gift. The short-handled hammer was brought in, and this is where the bride's hand tightened with a grip the giants had never felt. Thor threw off the veil in one clean motion, swung Mjölnir once, and the hammer sang its single terrible note. Thrym fell, and the next giant fell, and every other giant in that long cold hall fell in a quiet row. Thor rode home in his blazing chariot of storm, the goats stamping bright sparks from every paving stone beneath them. So the hammer returned to the same familiar hand, and Mjolnir stood again the strongest of all houses in Asgard. Yet for all his famous triumphs, the skalds of old kept turning their loom toward a darker, more final ending for the Lord. They sang of Ragnarök, the twilight of the powers, the last battle of the world when the fire giants would at last rise. In that hour Thor would meet his oldest enemy again, on a wide field without any mercy shown on either side. The serpent Jörmungandr would rear up out of the sea one final time, with venom hissing across the floor of heaven. Thor would strike at once with Mjolnir, and the serpent would fall for the first and only time in all of history. But 9 weary steps would be all he could walk, before the serpent's venom reached his pounding, thundering heart. He would fall with the same grim grin he had worn on every other battlefield, for he was the champion of the ordinary folk. We are told that in the new green world, Mjolnir will one day be found waiting for his steady hammer hand once again. Until that distant day, every summer thunder you hear is a hammer stroke of his falling on the wide northern hills. Every quickening of the spring is the green of Sif's golden hair returning softly across the meadowlands. Every peasant caught in a sudden storm is a mortal witness to a god who would gladly die for the common people. He never conquered wisdom as Odin did, nor poetry like Bragi, the gentlest god of the wandering singing bards. He conquered nothing but the deep fear of one more night alone in the dark, watched over only by cold stars. He was, in the oldest songs the skalds still sing in the long winter, the common people themselves, blazed up into the sky. If you love these old legends as we do here on Rune Legends, there is a whole wide playlist waiting here by the warm fire. In the next telling, Odin will lose his one fine eye at the well of Mimir for the deep price of true wisdom. Loki will steal the bright sun out of the open sky and the whole world will grow cold and strange in the dark. Tell me in the comments below which Old Norse god you would walk through Utgard beside, and I will meet you there next time. Until next time then, keep your own small hearth well lit, and listen for the soft hammer in the night sky.